Hello everyone and welcome to a face I'm sure you weren't really expecting to see at the moment. I thought I would jump on here and talk a little bit about the books I've been reading recently. I say recently, the last time I talked to you about what books I've been reading was sometime in 2019. I think I did like a spring wrap up or something like that, so that'll be like a year ago now. So basically I just thought let's talk about all the other books I read in 2019, and then later do a video about books I've been reading recently, do a little spring 2020 video. So there are quite a few books. Last time I talked to you was during a currently reading video where I talked about reading The Way of Kings Part 2, I think, and also the Artemis Fowl series. The Way of Kings Part 2 was an obvious 5 out of 5 stars read for me. I am kind of obsessed with the Stormlight Archive series, and you know, it's weird to be rating these books separately when they're Part 1 and Part 2 of the same book, but I really enjoyed Words of Radiance and just kind of barreled through the rest of the series from there. I also finished The Lost Colony by Owen Colfer, which is the fifth? I think it's the fifth Artemis Fowl series. Again, it's a reread that I always enjoy, although the fifth book for me is, as I said in the currently reading video, kind of the beginning of the downfall of the Artemis Fowl series, in my opinion, and kind of where the nostalgia starts to wear out a little bit. So it's a 4 out of 5 stars read for me instead of a 5 out of 5 stars read, and yeah, that's how it's always been. Also, you can probably hear Tom doing some building in the background. He's outside currently, doing a bit of building some furniture. Currently, he's fixing the stools on our kitchen island, which got a little bit destroyed from wear and tear, so he's fixing those at the moment. Sorry if you can hear it. That's just how life is at the moment in isolation. Gotta keep ourselves busy. After reading Lost Colony, I read Lies of the Beholder by Brandon Sanderson. I was on a huge Sanderson kick in 2019 and kind of still am, although I have run out of Sanderson to read now, so that's a bit depressing. Lies of the Beholder is the third Legion book. Legion is an interesting series from Sanderson. It started out as a short story that's like 50 pages. The second book is like 100 or 200 pages, I think, and then the third one is just a full-on book. So started out as a short story collection sort of thing, but just continued to be a full-blown series because everyone and Sanderson really enjoyed it. Now, I love Legion. I think it's such an interesting story. It's about this guy who invents like different personas that follow him around, and they're all experts in something. So like when he reads a book about mathematics or whatever, his brain creates a person that is the expert of that, and he has like 50 of them, and he has to choose who he takes along with him to different events and stuff, because he will only have that knowledge if he brings the like ghost or whatever with him. And it's about him like dealing with this weird schizophrenia thing, and it's really interesting, and like kind of magical but also kind of real in a way. And yeah, the first book is about this magic camera that can take pictures of the past, which is really cool. So I would recommend checking that out if you haven't read Legion yet. After that, I finished The Lost Hero, which I think I was also talking about in the currently reading video. Rick Riordan's books have always been like reading slump books for me, so they're always really like a 3 out of 5 stars. I do enjoy them from time to time, but they're not really my cup of tea. They're a little bit too middle grade and a little bit too like, I don't know, like chaotic for my liking, I guess. I feel like all that happens is like battle, travel, battle, travel, battle, travel, travel, battle, couple of bits of banter in between, and that's like all there is to it. I do enjoy them, just not that much. Then I read The Time Paradox, which is the 6th Artemis Fowl book. I do actually quite enjoy this, but in a weird nostalgic way, because as the title suggests, they go into the past, and an old Artemis Fowl enemy kind of shows up because they're in the past. And I love the dynamic between Artemis Fowl and this person. So I think that's really fun, but a lot of the reason why The Time Paradox is fun is because of the previous books, so it's a difficult one to rate and like think around, because like if those books hadn't existed, I wouldn't have liked this one as much. I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars just because I feel like most of the reason why I like it is the nostalgia, so I can't quite give it the 5 out of 5 stars. But still a very enjoyable read, and I've been listening to all of these on audiobook, so it's been a great listen for walking to school and that sort of thing. Then, lo and behold, I read another Brandon Sanderson novel. This one was Oathbringer, which is the 4th Stormlight Archive book and the last one to come out. The new one is coming out in November, I believe, and I cannot wait. I'm so excited. This one was interesting to me. So every Stormlight Archive book has several point of views that you follow, but each story focuses on one character. So you'll have like maybe more point of view of one character, or like flashbacks and stuff will be around that character. The first one was a character called Kaladin, and we just go through different characters throughout the different books. Oathbringer focuses on a character called Dalinar, and a lot of people in the Stormlight Archive community seems to love Dalinar, and I don't mind him, but in the previous books I haven't been that interested in his story. I did really enjoy learning more about his background and how he got to where he is. I think he's a really interesting character, but I also think it's a real shame that in this book in particular, Kaladin, which you follow in the first book, really doesn't get much to do. Also in the previous book, I feel like that was kind of the case, and Kaladin, because he's the character that you follow in the first book and you get to learn so much about him and his backstory, he's the one who dragged me into this universe, and although he's not the main character, he is the character that I want to hear from the most. So it was a little bit of a shame that I didn't get more of Kaladin in this book, and I'm hoping that that balance is struck better in the new book that's coming out in November, so that you get a good variety of point of views and that all of the characters have progression and something to do, and aren't just kind of there, which I feel like Kaladin was a little bit in this book. So this one was the first Stormlight Archive book that I only gave 4 out of 5 stars. Still really liked it, really enjoyed it, but man, just give Kaladin something to do. After that, I read All That She Can See by Carrie Hope Fletcher. This is also a weird one for me. I really enjoyed, or I quite enjoyed the first, like, 2/3 of the story. I think it was like a nice little contemporary cute woman does bakery to help people's feelings get better. Like, she can see other people's feelings, so she bakes her own feelings into her pies to like try and counteract everyone else's negative feelings. She will bake nice feelings into her pies, which is lovely idea, lovely story. And then in the last half of the book, it became like a weird action fight scene thing. I don't even really remember. Were there aliens? I can't remember. It was very weird, and like people were taken prisoner by this institution that were like monitoring people's feelings. It was very, very strange, and a complete flippin' tone from my point of view anyway. So sadly, I ended up giving this 2 out of 5 stars because that end was just bizarre to me. There was no kind of indication in the earlier part of the book that this was gonna be the continuation, that it was suddenly gonna become like an action movie. So yeah, bit of a strange book, that one. Then I read The Rest of Us Just Live Here by Patrick Ness. This book is split into 2 perspectives, one kind of normal contemporary one and one slightly magical realist perspective. And I really, really enjoyed the contemporary perspective and never really got on board, sadly, with the magical realism in the other perspective. So again, couldn't give this too many stars because like half of the book I didn't like and the other half I really enjoyed. So on Goodreads it says I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, but I haven't really thought about the book since, so maybe it's more of a 2.5 meh, it was alright kind of a book. After that I read The Rhythmatist by Brandon Sanderson. So I loved it, obviously. It has a really interesting magic system in it. It's not going to sound cool when I say it, but it's basically like people draw stuff with chalk, and then they like fight each other with chalk drawings, which sounds dumb, but it's very cool when Sanderson writes about it, I promise. And otherwise, the book is like this interesting kind of murder mystery novel, because people start going missing from the school that this story is set, and our main character ends up having to figure the whole thing out, obviously. Again, 5 out of 5 stars if I didn't say that already. Annoyingly though, I kind of wish that I hadn't read it just yet, because Sanderson has said that the sequel to this book is a long way off. So now I'm just sat here in agony waiting for the next book in this series, which is great. Then I read Steelheart by Brandon Sanderson. Again, Sanderson high. It was a very, very good year to read some Sanderson. Steelheart I've actually read already. I read it in maybe like 2015 or something like that. It was the first Sanderson book that I read, I believe. Was it? Is that a lie? Either it was the first Sanderson I read, or I read it right after having read Mistborn. I can't quite remember. Anyway, I didn't actually enjoy this book that much when I read it the first time. I feel like I kind of rushed through it, and I didn't really appreciate the world that it was in. And I think as well, I hadn't realized that it wasn't a part of the Cosmere, so it wasn't a fantasy world, and I was like shocked by the fact that it was set in our world but in the future. So I was just like, no, I do not like this book, it is stupid. It's not stupid, I just wasn't in the right mindset to read it. And after having read so much Sanderson already, I was like, damn it, I want to give that series another try. So I read Steelheart again, and I really enjoyed it. Who would have thought? I like all of Sanderson's books. This one is a 4 out of 5 stars. Really fun, action-packed, kind of like feels like a movie when you're reading it book. And the whole book is based around the question, like, what if superheroes were evil? And our main character joins up with this like rebel group that's trying to fight the superheroes, but they're just normal people trying to fight superheroes, so how do you do that? And yeah, I really enjoyed it. And the main character is really bad at puns, but he wants to be good at puns and jokes and all of that stuff. So the writing style in this is quite unique, because the guy keeps like trying to make puns and like describing things with bad metaphors, and it's a fun ride. Then I read Gemina by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This was a reread for me. I listened to it on audiobook because I really needed to read the third book and complete this trilogy once and for all, but I just never got around to rereading the first two, which I read ages ago. But it finally happened, and I really enjoyed it. Obviously, it's Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff, Illuminae series. It's great. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars, which I think is what I gave it the first time as well, although I'm not sure. I did kind of lose the plot a little bit when listening to the audiobook. Walking to and from school in London is kind of noisy, so sometimes I wouldn't like hear what they were talking about, and Gemini is quite a complicated plot, so sometimes I lost the plot a little bit. And yeah, that was mostly my own fault, but it did mean that some of the bits I didn't quite get this time around, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars in the end. After that, I read The Creakers by Tom Fletcher. You'll see a pattern here that I was looking for books that I could listen to whilst walking to and from school. Often I like listening to slightly like less plot heavy books on audiobooks so that I can more easily follow them, and The Creakers as a middle grade book was perfect for that. This is a really fun little middle grade story about what would happen if all the adults suddenly went missing and the kids had to try and find them again, basically. And yeah, it's a fun little story, 3 out of 5 stars. Nothing incredibly special, but you know, doesn't have to be. Then I finished the Steelheart series by reading Firefight and Calamity. I think overall this series is very solid. I gave them 4 out of 5 stars across the board. The series keeps raising the stakes and keeping it interesting throughout the whole thing, so I never got bored. And again, it's like reading an action movie, so I really just couldn't put them down. I was reading all day when I was reading these books, which is exactly the feeling that I want when I'm reading. Continuing on the Sanderson kick, I read Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first book in a sci-fi series, and it's the first sci-fi series Sanderson has read. and it's really strong. It's a lot of fun, again, kind of similar to a Steelheart series. It's very action-packed, very full of adventure, and never boring. Or like in his fantasy books that are really long, there will be a lot of like setup and plotting before every action event, but here it's just like action, 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 which is also really enjoyable at times. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars, absolutely love it. If you're interested in sci-fi, I would very much recommend checking this book out. Although it's not too new and like different from other sci-fi books, I think it does a lot of things really, really well. For instance, Sanderson has done a lot of research on fighter pilots and what it's like to fly in formation and that sort of thing, and writes those sequences amazingly. So really, really interesting read if you're interested in that sort of thing. After that, I read a non-fiction, which never happens. I read Fuck Yeah Video Games by Daniel Hardcastle. For those of you who might not know Daniel, he runs the YouTube channel Nerdcubed. I've been watching Nerdcubed for years and years. My brother introduced him to me in like 2010 maybe? Even earlier, I don't know. However long Nerdcubed has been doing YouTube, basically, I've been watching him. And he recently came out with a book where he talked about video games and stuff, which is also what he does on his YouTube channel. So I bought it and read it, and it was really fun. I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars, just because like there were some bits in between that talked about like different consoles and how they were made and kind of the story behind them. And I'm not that much of a video nerd that I'm interested in like the history of the different consoles, but I did really enjoy all the chapters where he just talked about some of his favorite games and made some jokes and told some stories. It was basically just like reading a Nerdcube video, which is exactly what I wanted from it. So all in all, good experience. Then I read Tunnel of Bones by Victoria Schwab. This is the second book in the Cassidy Blake series, the first of which being City of Ghosts. I believe this is seen as middle grade, but I would more classify it as like between middle grade and YA. It's about a girl who almost died, which means she can now see ghosts. Her parents are making this ghost hunting TV show, so they travel around the world, and she ends up being in cities that are very haunted and have to solve issues, like kind of murder mystery style. And I just think this whole series is a lot of fun. I think I actually like the second book more than the first one. I feel like there was more meat to it, and the ghost story was more interested in this one. There wasn't as much setup that needed to happen because we already knew Cassidy and we already knew her situation. So there was more opportunity for exploration, and I just had a great time reading this. Again, couldn't put it down. And I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, if I didn't say that already. I keep not knowing if I've already said the star rating that I gave them. Follow me on Goodreads if you want to see the actual star ratings, because I'm shit at this. After that, I read Starsight by Brandon Sanderson. This is the second book to the Skyward series, and I didn't actually realize this when I read Skyward, but I finished Skyward and I was like, oh my god, when is the second book coming out? And I googled it, and it was coming out in like 2 weeks after I'd finished Skyward, so that was amazing timing. So I bought it on my Kindle the day it came out and read it like over that weekend, and it was just a great experience. I really enjoyed reading both of the books kind of like back to back, and you know, having the story so fresh in my mind. I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5 stars, and if you remember, the first book was a 5 out of 5 stars, and the only reason for that really is that in the second book we kind of travel away from the setting of the first book, and our main character is by herself, away from all the characters we got to know in the first book. And I really just missed their like fighter pilot dynamic, you know. We still get a lot of fighter piloting in this second book, but I missed the characters that I learned to love in the first one, so I'm hoping we'll get more of them in the third and final installment of this series. And finally, the last book that I read in 2019, Jesus Christ, so many books, is The Toll by Neil Shusterman. This read was a weird one for me because I'd read the first 2 books in the Scythe series ages ago and didn't really remember that much. I read like a little synopsis sort of thing, and I was like, okay, cool, I think I know what I'm doing. But it basically meant that all the threads that were coming together in this third one were a little bit lost on me. Not to the point where I didn't enjoy the book, but just to the point where I didn't quite feel like I got all of the like emotional impact of the book that I probably would have done if I'd read the whole series together. So I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. Still really enjoyed it. I know everyone who loved the Scythe series absolutely adore this final installment, and it's definitely not a disappointing ending to the series at all. But I just kind of fallen off the hype train a little bit between the time of reading the second and the third book. that I read in 2019 that you haven't heard me talk about yet. I hope you're all doing okay and are staying safe in this weird time that we're living in, and I will see you all very soon. Bye.